In this explainer, we're going to build a high-scoring IB economics essay plan right from the ground up. And our focus is going to be on one of the most critical topics out there today, using market-based policies to tackle carbon emissions.
Right, let's break this down. This is a classic 15-mark question. The key command term you absolutely have to notice is discuss. That means you need a balanced review. You need to look at a range of arguments and factors. And the other big keyword? Effectiveness. Every single point you make must link back to how well these policies actually work in the real world. So here's our roadmap. We're going to construct the essay logically, starting with a solid introduction, building the argument through 3 distinct analytical paragraphs, and then landing on a powerful evaluative conclusion. If you follow this structure, you'll be well on your way.
First things first, a strong introduction. Now this isn't just a warm-up. It's where you define the scope of your essay and set a really clear direction for your entire argument.
The very first thing you have to do is define the core economic problem. State clearly that carbon emissions are a negative externality. This creates a market failure where the true cost to society, that's the marginal social cost, or MSC, is higher than the cost to the individual producer, the marginal private cost, or MPC. And the result of that? An overproduction of carbon-intensive goods.
Next, you need a sharp thesis that frames your entire argument. And don't just list policies, you have to compare them. For example, a great thesis would be something like, while both the EU's emissions trading system and Canada's carbon tax aim to internalize this externality, the EU model prioritizes guaranteed emission cuts through a quantity cap, whereas the Canadian model prioritizes price stability and social fairness through its dividend system. See? That sets up a perfect comparison.
Okay, let's move on to your first body paragraph and see how this all builds. Here, you'll dissect the fundamental mechanics of each policy. That's the price signal versus the quantity cap.
You'll start by explaining how each policy works. The EU's emissions trading system, or ETS, is a cap and trade system. The government sets a firm cap on total emissions, creating a fixed or perfectly inelastic supply of permits. The big advantage here is that it guarantees the quantity of reductions. In contrast, you've got Canada's policy, which is a direct tax. This sets a clear, rising price on carbon, giving businesses a really predictable signal to change their behavior.
Now, let's bring in those real-world examples to measure effectiveness. The EU ETS has been remarkably successful by its core metric. It's achieved a nearly 50% reduction in emissions from the industries covered by the scheme since it began. That's a huge number.
Now, Canada's results have been a bit more modest so far. The policy is credited with an 8.5% reduction in overall emissions, which is significant, for sure, but it highlights the different scale and scope compared to the EU's very targeted industrial cuts.
And here's a fantastic high-level evaluation point you can make. Both of these systems suffer from asymmetric information, which is basically the idea that governments don't have perfect knowledge. For example, in the early days of the ETS, the EU set the emissions cap too high, and what happened? Permit prices crashed. Likewise, a government might set a carbon tax too low to really be effective, simply because they're uncertain about the economic impact.
For your second analytical paragraph, you should pivot from the pure mechanics to the social and equity implications of these policies. This is what demonstrates a much broader understanding of economics to the examiner.
The key contrast to really dig into here is how the revenue is used. In Canada, they recycle a big portion of the carbon tax revenue directly back to households as a carbon dividend. The EU, on the other hand, does something very different. It directs its revenue into these massive green funds, like its Innovation Fund, to finance long-term technological development.
And this highlights a really crucial trade-off. You see, carbon taxes can be regressive, meaning they hit low-income households harder as a percentage of their income. Canada's dividend is designed specifically to counteract this, which helps maintain public support. This is such a powerful evaluation point, especially when you contrast it with the Yellow Vest protests in France, which were sparked by a fuel tax increase that lacked a similar rebate mechanism.
Now, to push your essay into those top mark bands, your third paragraph should engage with more advanced economic concepts like allocative efficiency and the problem of carbon leakage. So here, you could discuss allocative efficiency. In the EU's mature ETS market, the high trading volume helps ensure that emissions cuts happen where they are cheapest to make. On the other hand, you can analyze carbon leakage. This is the risk that companies simply move their production and their emissions to countries with weaker laws. And Canada's system is actually specifically designed to prevent this for its key industries.
But here's a crucial point. These policies are evolving. Both the EU and Canada are now implementing something called Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanisms, or CBAMs. This is essentially a tariff on imports from countries without similar carbon pricing. It levels the playing field and directly addresses that carbon leakage problem on a global scale. It's a game changer.
And finally, your conclusion. Now, this is not the place to introduce new information. It's where you synthesize all your arguments and deliver a sophisticated, final judgment that directly answers the essay question.
A great conclusion really has two parts. First, you briefly summarize the key trade-offs you've discussed, quantity certainty versus price certainty, or long-term innovation funding versus immediate social equity. Second, you weigh this evidence to form a nuanced, conditional judgment.
Your final verdict should really avoid a simplistic one is better than the other statement. Instead, show the examiner you understand the complexity here. The best or most effective system depends entirely on the primary policy objective. If the absolute priority is to guarantee a specific emissions target is met, then the EU's cap-and-trade system is superior. If, however, the goal is to build a politically durable and socially fair policy, then the Canadian model with its dividend offers a more sustainable path.
And this leaves us with the final, thought-provoking question that sits at the very heart of this entire debate. It's the dilemma facing every policymaker today. What do you prioritize? The environmental certainty of a hard cap or the political certainty that comes from public support? And there is no easy answer.